For decades, John Deere was the backbone of American agriculture. Farmers relied on its iconic green machines to power their fields, sustain their businesses, and drive the economy. But today, that trust is broken. Layoffs, outsourcing, skyrocketing, equipment costs. A farming crisis now threatens the entire $34 to $5 billion industry. Farmers are fighting back, and the future of U.S. agriculture hangs in the balance. This isn't just about tractors, it's about economic survival. From small-town farming communities to major global trade markets, John Deere's latest move has triggered a chain reaction that could reshape American farming forever. In today's video, we break down why John Deere is cutting U.S. jobs and shifting production to Mexico, how its restrictive repair policies are driving farmers away, the collapse of crop prices, and China's role in the crisis, Trump's fiery response, and the political battle over U.S. manufacturing. With rural America on the brink, the stakes have never been higher. Do you think John Deere's decision will backfire? Or is this the new reality for American farming? Share your thoughts in the comments. What's happening? For nearly 2 centuries, John Deere has been more than just a company. It has been the heart of American agriculture. Farmers across the U.S. have relied on its machines to cultivate fields, harvest crops, and sustain rural economies. With a legacy spanning over 180 years, John Deere became a symbol of innovation, reliability, and the American farming dream. But today, that dream is turning into a nightmare. The company that once represented strength and prosperity is now at the center of a farming crisis. Once an unshakable force in agricultural machinery, John Deere now faces declining sales, a frustrated customer base, and an economic downturn that has sent shockwaves through the farming world. The numbers paint a grim picture. The U.S. agricultural industry, valued at over $34 billion, is struggling under falling crop prices, soaring operational costs, and shifting global trade dynamics. Now, the one company farmers have trusted for generations is facing its biggest challenge yet. How did this happen? How did the undisputed leader in farming equipment end up in turmoil? It all started with a devastating wave of layoffs. And when those layoffs began, the impact was felt far beyond the factory floor. The layoffs that shook American farming. John Deere has long been a pillar of farming communities, employing tens of thousands of workers across the U.S. But in recent months, the company has made drastic cuts, laying off workers in multiple plants and restructuring operations due to declining sales. Since 2015, over 4,500 jobs have been eliminated, and the numbers keep rising. Just this year, nearly 200 factory workers in Iowa lost their jobs due to production slowdowns. In towns where John Deere is the largest employer, these layoffs have hit hard. Families who have depended on the company for generations are now struggling, and local businesses that relied on John Deere workers' spending are feeling the squeeze. But these layoffs are just a symptom of a deeper issue. Farmers aren't buying new equipment. With falling crop prices and rising costs, many are delaying or canceling purchases of tractors, harvesters, and machinery. When fewer farmers buy, John Deere sells less, forcing the company to cut production and lay off workers. This economic domino effect is devastating rural America. Many farming towns were already struggling, and the loss of high-paying manufacturing jobs only deepens the crisis. Entire communities are built around John Deere factories, and when the company cuts jobs, it's not just employees who suffer. It's an entire way of life at risk. And it's not just workers feeling abandoned. Farmers themselves are turning away from John Deere in record numbers. Why farmers are ditching John Deere. For generations, John Deere was the gold standard in farm equipment. Farmers were willing to pay a premium for its tractors, harvesters, and precision farming tools because they trusted the brand's reliability and performance. But that loyalty is fading. Fast. One of the biggest reasons? John Deere's aggressive anti-repair policies. Farmers are outraged that they can't fix their own tractors without going through Deere's expensive, restrictive software system. The company has locked its equipment behind a digital wall, preventing independent mechanics and farmers from making even the simplest repairs without paying high fees. This has fueled the growing right-to-repair movement, with farmers nationwide demanding the ability to fix their own equipment without being forced to use Deere's authorized technicians. The backlash has been so intense that some states have passed laws requiring John Deere to ease its repair restrictions. But for many farmers, it's too little, too late. This version keeps the impact and urge. Farmers turn away from John Deere. As frustration mounts, farmers are actively seeking alternatives to John Deere. Brands like Kubota, AGCO, and Case IH are gaining traction by offering more repair-friendly equipment at competitive prices. Some farmers are even turning to smaller, lesser-known brands or importing machinery from countries like China, a market once dominated by Deere. John Deere's refusal to adapt to farmers' demands is driving loyal customers away. And with the company facing growing financial struggles, losing even a small percentage of its customer base could spell disaster. To make matters worse, global economic pressures are exacerbating Deere's situation. The perfect storm, John Deere's problems extend beyond its business decisions. A massive economic shift is reshaping agriculture worldwide, hitting both American farmers and Deere hard. One of the biggest challenges? The collapse of U.S. crop prices. Since 2022, corn prices have plummeted by 37%, soybeans by 24%, and wheat by 35%. For farmers, these price drops are devastating, cutting into profits and making it even harder to justify spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on new machinery. Then there's China. Experts once predicted that China would become one of the world's largest importers of American-grown food. That prediction never materialized. Instead of relying on U.S. farms, China has heavily invested in its own agricultural sector, ramping up domestic food production at an unprecedented rate. The result? Decreased demand for American exports, another financial blow to U.S. farmers. The global economic downturn is only making matters worse. Inflation has driven up the cost of essentials like diesel fuel and fertilizer. Meanwhile, high interest rates have made borrowing money more expensive than ever, leaving struggling farmers unable to take out loans for new equipment. All these pressures have combined into a perfect storm that is devastating American agriculture. And John Deere is feeling the full force of it. In an attempt to weather this storm, the company made its most controversial decision yet, one that sparked outrage across the country. John Deere's bold move, shifting jobs to Mexico. When John Deere announced plans to shift part of its manufacturing operations to Mexico, the backlash was immediate and explosive. Farmers, workers, and politicians across the country viewed it as a betrayal, a move prioritizing corporate profits over American jobs. For Deere, the decision was about cutting costs and staying competitive. The company claimed that relocating certain production tasks, such as cab assembly, to Mexico would help optimize operations. By keeping high-value manufacturing in the U.S. while outsourcing lower-skill tasks, Deere argued it could reduce expenses without fully abandoning American production. On paper, the strategy seemed logical. Mexico offers cheaper labor, lower operating costs, and favorable trade policies. By outsourcing select tasks, John Deere hoped to reinvest in innovation and secure long-term profitability. However, for American workers, the move was a slap in the face. Thousands of Deere employees had already lost their jobs due to layoffs, and instead of rebuilding, the company was choosing to move jobs overseas. To many, it felt like a betrayal of American workers, But if Deere expected this decision to go unnoticed, it was in for a rude awakening, because it sparked one of the biggest political firestorms in recent history. Donald Trump's furious response, it didn't take long for former President Donald Trump to weigh in. Known for his hardline stance on trade and manufacturing, Trump saw John Deere's move as a direct attack on American jobs, and in typical Trump fashion, he fired back with a massive threat. At a campaign rally, Trump vowed to impose a 200% tariff on John Deere imports if the company followed through with its plan to shift production to Mexico. This wasn't just political posturing. It was a serious economic warning. Trump had successfully used tariffs before to pressure companies into keeping jobs in the U.S. His administration's tariffs on Chinese goods reshaped global trade, and his threats against automakers prevented some outsourcing. Now, he was applying the same strategy to John Deere. The logic behind Trump's threat was simple. If John Deere wanted to manufacture in Mexico, it would pay the price when trying to sell those products back in the U.S. A 200% tariff would make it nearly impossible for Deere to profit from imports, forcing the company to rethink its decision. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Investors panicked, and John Deere's stock dropped by more than 1.5% in after-hours trading. Wall Street analysts feared that such a tariff could cripple Deere's supply chain and lead to even more layoffs. The big question: would John Deere back down? Or would it push forward despite the risk? Protests and boycotts John Deere's decision to move jobs to Mexico wasn't just a political issue. It was personal for thousands of American farmers. For decades, Deere symbolized American farming strength, its success deeply connected to rural communities. But now, many of those same communities felt abandoned. In response, farmers began organizing protests and boycotts. Across the Midwest, rallies erupted outside John Deere dealerships, with farmers demanding the company reconsider its decision. Some even stopped purchasing John Deere equipment altogether, turning instead to competitors like Kubota, Case IH, and AGCO. Brands they felt hadn't turned their backs on them. Even John Deere workers joined the protests. Many feared that continued outsourcing would lead to further job losses. For employees who had spent decades on the factory floor, watching jobs move across the border felt like witnessing their own livelihoods slowly disappear. Public pressure put John Deere in a difficult position. The company was already struggling, with declining sales and rising costs. Could it afford to alienate its loyal customers? But as the political battle raged on, another major factor was emerging that could reshape the future of farming entirely. The rise of China. For decades, the United States has dominated global agriculture, feeding not just its own country, but much of the world. American farmers exported billions of dollars worth of crops and equipment each year. But that dominance is now under threat, led by China. Once seen as a country dependent on food imports, China has flipped the script. Through government investment, new technology, and strategic policies, it has rapidly transformed into an agricultural powerhouse. One of the biggest shifts has been China's rise in farm equipment manufacturing. Farmers worldwide once relied on brands like John Deere, Case IH, and New Holland for high-quality machinery. But now, Chinese companies are producing tractors, harvesters, and precision farming tools at a fraction of the cost. Take YTO Group and Zoomlion, two Chinese manufacturers, aggressively expanding their market share. Their tractors and harvesters may not have the same reputation as John Deere, but they are significantly cheaper, sometimes half the price. And for farmers working within tight budgets, affordability is hard to ignore. In regions like Africa, South America, and even parts of Europe, Chinese-made farm equipment is gaining traction. Many developing countries, which once depended on American exports, are now opting for China's more affordable alternatives. For John Deere, this poses a major challenge. If global farmers turn away from American-made equipment, the company's leadership in the industry could be at serious risk. But China's influence on American farming doesn't stop at equipment. It's also reshaping global crop production, with major consequences. Falling crop prices. American farmers are facing harsh economic realities. Crop prices are plummeting, and many blame China's increased production for flooding the market. Corn prices, for example, have dropped by over 37% since 2022. Wheat and soybean prices have also fallen, making it harder for farmers to stay profitable. One key reason? China is growing more of its own crops than ever before. For years, many believed China's growing population and urbanization would make it one of the biggest importers of American agricultural products. The U.S. was expected to benefit from China's food demands for decades. But instead of increasing its reliance on U.S. imports, China invested heavily in its own agricultural production, expanding irrigation, developing high-yield crops, and embracing modern farming techniques. China has exceeded expectations in boosting its domestic food supply. As a result, China is now importing far less from the U.S., creating an oversupply that has driven prices down. This has triggered a devastating ripple effect. With prices so low, many U.S. farmers are struggling to stay afloat. And when farmers earn less, they spend less on equipment, further hurting companies like John Deere. For decades, American farmers were assured that China would always be a reliable market for their exports. But now, that assumption has been shattered, leaving the U.S. agricultural industry scrambling to find new buyers and solutions. However, China isn't the only force reshaping American agriculture. Technology is also transforming the industry in ways few could have predicted. The robot revolution. While John Deere battles declining sales and foreign competition, another revolution is sweeping the farming industry: automation. Autonomous tractors, robotic harvesters, and AI-powered precision farming tools are changing how crops are grown and harvested. Companies that fail to adapt risk being left behind. John Deere itself has been at the forefront of this shift. In recent years, it has invested billions in self-driving tractors, automated sprayers,